Hello everyone, thanks for coming to the session. This is Vishal, I am a developer advocate with DevZero.
And I am Devo. I'm one of the co-founders of the company and an engineer. So before we started DevZero about a year back. Before this, I spent 6 years at Uber as an infrastructure engineer, and DevZero is a collection of lessons from Uber that we are now bringing to market. So yeah.
And today we want to talk about accelerating open source journey with cloud development environments. As this is open source 101, we thought this would be a great talk for everyone, for anyone who is already contributing to open source projects or anyone getting to start contributing. So based on that, just want to ask, like, how many already contribute to open source projects? Okay. How many want to? Okay. Probably, are you looking, do you find any barriers when you want to contribute to open source projects? If couple can raise their hand and answer.
Sorry, getting set up with how to like make sure what I contribute actually works with the software.
Okay.
Is this kind of new to programming?
Okay. So kind of overwhelmed with what to do and how. Okay. Anyone else?
So like they said in the opening presentation,
Mm-hmm.
not sure how to like, not confident enough about myself to like, am I the right person to give
Okay.
the right advice?
Confidence.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll get there. Thank you. Okay. So if anyone is completely new, as someone said, what are open source contributions and why to do? I will just start with that and then proceed into the issues that we have and how we can resolve this kind of outline. So if you see, there are lots of open source projects, and why contributions make sense, because open source projects are created by community for community. So, and as Philip said, the power of open source is the power of the people, and the people rule. It's kind of democracy for the software as the open source. So, and if you see, community will be sharing the knowledge with everyone as they contribute. Someone from the community might start creating an open source project. They will put it on a public repo, either GitHub or any other source control. Anyone can look at it, see if they like it, use it, and start contributing. And why should we contribute to open source? You might think, okay, someone created it, I will just use it. What's the need for me to contribute? I might use and share feedback, but why should exactly I contribute? There are lots of multiple reasons, and some might resonate with you and some might not. Some reasons are building your portfolio, because you are doing this work which is on a public open source project. This showcases your value. You will be contributing, and you, let's say it's on GitHub. Whenever you make some contribution, it's with your user ID. And if it's a popular open source project and you took one of the issues and then you made some contribution and it got merged, it's a big achievement for you. And then one more thing is getting together with a group of like-minded people all over the globe. It might be difficult to find passionate people as much as you are liking a project or you are into it. Let's say if I like cloud a lot and I want to contribute to cloud native. If you go to cloud native community, you will find lots of like-minded people who are in a similar stage as you. So you can network together, have some group calls, learn from each other, and then start contributing. And yeah, one more thing, great thing is finding mentors actually. There are lots of people who are ready to help. As some of you said, you are overwhelmed with what you want to do, and there is lots of information. There are many people who went through the situation and ready to help you. So you would be able to find mentors who would be guiding you through step by step on how to achieve or how to go in a stage where you feel confident enough that you are ready to contribute. And as someone said, they don't feel confident enough to contribute. In the next slide, if you see the statistics, this is continuation of, sorry, why you want to contribute. 97% of the companies are utilizing open source in their projects. and 90% of the companies are using it in some way. And these are from the actual reports, and we also have the references. One is from Synopsys, second one is from the GitHub October's report. So these are actual data. When you look at the companies that are using GitHub, companies that are using open source, you want to be part of it. You don't want to be left out or feel like I don't know anything about it. And when you look at the top 100 companies, 30% of Fortune 100 companies are having open source projects as well that they support. And this is the last one I felt very interesting, because these days I see lots of companies that are being built on top of open source. So 50% of the first time contributors are somewhere related to these companies that are built on top of open source. And I would like to thank all companies that are built on top of open source, because they support these open source projects a lot and open source community a lot. Even though they are built, every company to sustain financially, they have to make money. But companies that are built on open source, while making money, they also contribute to open source a lot and help people who like the project contribute in an easier way. Rather than having volunteers run it, these companies help run those projects, assign community contributors and organizers as well, who help newcomers and having these guidelines, documentation. You might understand how much work it takes to create all these guidelines for community, even to contribute. And when someone wants to get started with open source contributions, even myself, when I initially wanted to contribute, I thought the same way as you said. Okay, what I need to do? Am I good enough? Do I know everything to contribute to that project? I may not be aware. I don't want to be a fool in front of many people, in front of the global community. But when I actually researched about it, I saw all these areas that I can contribute to. It's just not code. There are multiple areas in which you can contribute to the open source project. Let's say if you're passionate about designing, then you can support them with graphic designing. There will be lots of events that they're doing, you can support as a graphic designer. Let's say if you're a social media enthusiast, then you can be on social media, bring more awareness about that project, and still be a contributor. And if you want to be a developer, then you can make code contributions. But you can see all the different areas. And let's say if you're into testing, lots of open source projects require beta testers to see contributions made from the community, whether they are working or not. So you can also do testing and just helping community. So I work as a developer advocate, and if you want to get into developer relations, one of the important skills for a developer advocate is to have empathy. And when you can empathize with developers when you actually understand their problems and try to resolve them. So the last point, mentoring and answering questions and discussions within the community is a great value for the community as well as the person that is trying to help them, because you will be learning a lot in this process. But today we are going to talk about code contributions. But if you have any other questions about other types of contributions, feel free to contact us and we will be happy to help. In terms of code contributions, we want to see, I want to showcase how the process is currently. Whenever someone wants to contribute to any open source project as a code contributor, currently what's the process? So you will initially go through the process of finding the passionate project that you are interested in multiple ways. There are also different websites where they take the data based on your profile. Let's say you can input your tech stack like JavaScript, Flutter, or Cloud, Kubernetes, all these, and they will show you the projects, that open source projects that are looking for contributions in these areas. So let's say you got the project, you decided this is the project that I want to work on. Then what you will do is go through a README file, and most of the active GitHub projects or most of the active open source projects have a solid README file that is actively maintained, which has all the instructions on how to proceed with. And then once you see all the details like what the project is about, what tech stack it contains, what type of contributions you can make, at the end you might find one more guidelines document which showcases the step-by-step process of how you can contribute. And can you go to the next slide? Once you get to the document, that has all the technical specifications actually. So, for example, if you take any open source project, it has lots of different files if you go and see. And you might be thinking, oh, this has so many files, and what should I do now? Even with the technical specifications, they have all these tools that you need to install. And let's say at 10th step, I found I got stuck with any issue. Then you might be thinking what to do next. Then you will be sharing with the community the issue that you found, they will be trying to resolve. But in this process, we saw, not we, but the community saw a lot of hiccups in this process, and many people dropped out without contributing to the project. So this is one of the areas that we would like to focus on. And also, whenever you are trying to contribute to the code, it is also overwhelming to learn some new technologies or new programming languages just for the sake of installing them on your computer. This is one of the issues that is majorly a drawback for many people that would like to contribute to the project. Debo will take over, continue.
Yeah. So essentially, like taking from some of the things Vishal mentioned, right? Because even for me, I think the first time I contributed to open source was about 7, 8-ish years back, and it was back then Debosmit was one of the ways in which you computer vision tech, and things like TensorFlow, etc., didn't exist then. And I remember like just that portion of like getting started, it took me at least a couple days. And most people lose enthusiasm at that point. Like your motivation is constantly taking a beating. And so there's that component. Then it is like generally getting people to come and essentially contribute their work for free. That takes a lot of effort as well. Like there's the social media aspect of it, like getting enough popularity in a given project in order to even entice others to come and contribute to it. Then there is always the issue around, okay, I developed this pull request on some operating system somewhere, and now CI, all of the tasks over there are failing. Lint isn't working for some awful reason because my IDE wasn't editing the code as I was saving the files. So there is all of that stuff that also happens. Then there is, if you look at more of the popular projects today, right, even the top 1,000 GitHub projects, be it by the number of stars they have or the number of contributions that they attract, generally these are all very, very heavy projects. They take a long time to compile, especially if it's in some sort of a non-interpreted language. Even if you look at things like Python's Flask, etc., these are all, like, these aren't easy projects to contribute to, yet these are the ones that require a lot of contributors. Then there is, I'm sure there's been a lot of conversation about CNCF generally today, and most of the projects there, sure, they'll get started by some of the larger companies because they see a bunch of issues in the space. Think about things like Cloud Custodian, which is a recently incubated project, or even the more popular ones like Kubernetes and Jaeger. These aren't things that you can just start developing on your local computer because they fundamentally need a bunch of other cloud native resources, even if it's something like a Terraform. So now how can we enable more people in the community to just go and contribute to some of these projects without them having to like have this uphill fight right off the bat? That is one of the things we'll try to answer today. Because fundamentally, based on what we do at DevZero, some of these things get unlocked. And then there is just a lot of these projects, because they are usually started by folks in some of these larger companies, we make a lot of assumptions on the tooling and the framework that is used. These aren't things, especially if someone's starting out, whether you're in college, etc., you don't necessarily have the exposure to some of this tooling. And just expecting folks to have it on their local computer doesn't really work. These levels of like the general inconsistencies, be it in the tooling that is available or some of the coding and the other software practices. So how can some of these things start to get centralized and almost templatized in ways? So that's a part of what I will be covering. And then I'll also finish with a demo on how we are thinking about making available some of the larger open source projects from within DevZero itself. So folks can just go and start coding. That's the goal. So this is actually, I didn't know this guy. So he's a friend of a friend. He sent me a text on Saturday, so he contributes to Apache Lucene, which powers things like Elasticsearch. And essentially, like this was a pull request that he asked me to take a look at, and fundamentally, this guy is a contributor to MongoDB. He works at MongoDB. He's experienced in the industry, yet currently, as he was trying to send a pull request to Lucene, a bunch of lint related stuff was breaking in his pull request. His thing was like, in my local, everything worked on an older version of Mac. But now, inside this pull request, like, things were, lint was broken, it was importing unnecessary packages according to the maintainers. So how can we codify all of the various requirements that a certain project might have, was his question to me. And I just texted him right before this because I created the thing for Lucene, and I guess he's also starting to use it now. So now, why should contributors care about something like this? Because contributors fundamentally, as Vishal was talking about, you care about getting some of that experience, you build up your resume. But at this point in time, how can we make it easier for folks to just get started? Because you're there, you have found a pull request rather a GitHub issue somewhere with the help needed tag, which is usually how folks in the open source community will request any contributor to come and help out. You just want to get started. But then there's this contributing.md file. There's a readme.md, like 50, 60 different steps that you have to go through before you can write that first line of code. But you just want to write code and start tinkering with the software. So we want to like get across like all of those hurdles over there. And generally for the maintainers and reviewers, right? Like these are people that are inside these companies, sure. Like the initial problem that I wanted to solve with this, and as I mentioned, I was at Uber before this, and Jaeger was one of the pieces of software that was developed there. And another one being around the Prometheus scene. And with Jaeger, again, the thing is, we don't necessarily want to staff up as much inside the companies, hence requiring the open source community to come and help contribute. And at that point in time, sure, there's the software development help, and then you just generally want to like enforce some standards, right, in your code base. And fundamentally what I've seen is, and if anyone's interested, you should go and take a look at that pull request as well. A lot of cycles are wasted, like about basic lint related issues, or sometimes some random test that's failing, not even in a piece of code that you have touched. These things are unnecessary. It's just wasted human productivity, and like we would really like to change that. Then there's the aspect of, okay, I've introduced a few changes. This usually happens when the set of changes we are introducing are somewhat more complex. There's no way to preview what's going on. What is this committer actually trying to change in the project? Sure, I can read a couple of lines of code, try to infer based on my knowledge of the project, but what has actually changed? Can I see this entire thing running end to end? Again, this is something we had run into with Jaeger at Uber, because that had a very large UI component to it to be able to see traces for distributed applications. There was no way to see it, and the only way for us was clone everything, completely reset our laptops, get all the changes that were coming in, set everything up, run it to actually see if this UI change was working the way we'd expect things to. Yeah, not the most scalable thing on the planet. And it fundamentally, like, as a result of this, we'd find that the pull request review times in most of the UI related stuff would just take significantly longer because no one wanted to go through those hurdles. And then there is like production in most cases is Linux, or in some cases Windowsy things. A lot of times software is still developed on Mac laptops, so there's this convergence, or rather divergence of configuration across environments that happens all the time. So is there a way to centralize some of these things? And everything doesn't necessarily have to be just with cloud development environments. I'll cover that as well. There's a bunch of more technologies available today that will help developers, but at the end of the day, the maintainers and the folks that are essentially responsible for the these projects, they have to take that first step to enable other contributors to come in. Let's see. All right. So one of the things that I'm proposing is, like, a lot of the readmes, the contributing.md files, etc. How can we make most of these things just go away? In today's world, we have things like Docker, Vagrant. Depending on the technology stack that we are working on, how can we just remove the requirement of every single contributor having to go through the exact same set of lines on their local computers in order to get a project set up? Like, that is just redundant work across the stack. Then there's also obviously all of the other tooling that we need either to run tests or for the different package managers out there, etc. These are all things that can be centralized into some set of templates, be it a Docker file somewhere. Vagrants were pretty hot maybe 4 or 5 years back. Nowadays, not as much. But still, like, you get the idea. Like, if something can be even Terraform, it makes everything else easier for everyone else. And more recently, Nix has been really cool, especially as a package manager, and to be able to still continue to use a host operating system, yet bringing in host level packages everywhere with Docker file level flexibility. I don't know if you guys listened to the Nix talk earlier today, like from the Flux guys, but I'm sure that was fantastic. Okay, so with this, I'll just open up an ID and talk through some stuff on how things can be in a cloud development environment world, but primarily the magic over here is just in the templatization and how that can make just getting projects set up and running significantly faster. Before I do that, maybe a quick show of hands over here. Like, love to understand like how many of us are writing software on a daily basis, maybe for our jobs, etc. Oh, not population. Yeah, and if anyone was curious, like this was the pull request, and it was a bunch of like lint related things, which was blocking this Lucene project. But for someone that wants to, let's say, contribute to Lucene now, the flow is going to be something like this. So we have a set of like trial accounts or rather templates, etc. available. So if I open Lucene up over here while that thing is running in the background, we see over here that there's a lot of documentation and stuff to read. Like before I write that first line of code, I have to read all of this, read this guide somewhere, set up my Java Gradle, and especially for things like Java and Gradle, setting it up right for the operating system that you're on. All of this is just too much work. And then you have like, it's just lines and lines of documentation everywhere. So the word we try to get to is like what we do at DevZero. We have a concept of templates. And I can, when this thing comes up, we'll essentially get into an environment wherein everything has already been like set up and everything for us. And then all the developer would need on their local computer is essentially an IDE to connect to this environment, and we're good to go. For simplicity's sake, I'll just maybe use this for now. And we'll, like net, what's happening underneath is we'll go into an environment. I'll open VS Code within my browser. So from the end developer perspective, you still get a very similar experience. And I'll go into a couple of other things after. So I'm here. I don't care about this. Open up a terminal. At this point, like everything's ready to go. No more setting up of things necessary. So should not use caps lock. And like all of those contributing MDs, everything just gets condensed. So for folks that want to contribute to this project, you're good. Nothing else. These tests take a minute to run. It's not a minute, it takes over 10 minutes to run. Even on the very powerful computer that we have over here. But regardless. And then like essentially from the end developer's perspective, it ultimately becomes look for help needed, find a simple enough thing to get started on, click one of these buttons, just get started. Start building your feature, collect feedback, send out a pull request, good to go. But after this, I'll actually go into a couple of other things that we do at DevZero, but the vibes and the themes are actually very, very similar. And I'm hoping some of us will be able to take these away to either like the open source project, like either start contributing to them or take it even into the workplace on the day-to-day projects that we work on. I'll get rid of that. So now, microservices, is this something some of us in this room are aware of or use on a regular basis? Seeing a few nods, nice, okay. So one of the things, again, in a similar nature, one of the things we do is, in production, we have workload management systems normally. Like Kubernetes is a pretty popular one. Some people use Mesos. There's Amazon has things like ECS. There's AWS has Lambda and serverless, etc. The problem becomes I can't run Lambda on my local computer, or I can't really run Kubernetes on my local computer. So ultimately, we resort to trying to create a copy of production in my local using something like a combination of Docker files and Docker Compose. But at the end of the day, these things are never really, they never match with prod. And then we run into a similar set of issues during CI as well. So something we try to get rid of is this fundamental issue of like configuration drifting. So how can we reuse whatever we already have in production to like for our everyday development for every engineer? Like all of us engineers, we don't have to share the same set of resources everywhere as long as infrastructure as code exists at some layer. So one thing I will demonstrate now is this is one, again, another template that we have. It contains a couple of projects inside it. This one's essentially a coffee shop application. We tried to make Starbucks. Clearly not very well, but that's all right. So now this is my local VS Code, but now this is actually connected to a computer in the cloud, either a container or a virtual machine. None of the source code, none of this stuff is on my local computer anymore. I don't have any programming tools on my computer. So at this point in time, imagine you're working on this full stack application. Every single thing over here is already built and ready to go. So I can, if you click this, this. When you're working on a change in most of these, the companies that we work at today, we code it up, we send out a pull request, we'll either get a colleague to review it, it'll get pushed into a staging or a dev environment of some sort before we can get that first bit of feedback. The same problem exists in the open source contributions that we essentially have to make, because we can't really see an end-to-end system working ever. So how can we condense a lot of that into, so like this environment that I just got, it has this thing running inside it already. And now I'll just make a quick demonstration here on like, what should we write over here? I'll just write Charlotte because that's where we are. So how can we bring this level of feedback loops into all of, like into getting the entire stack running on one box? And these links you can share it with your colleagues. So instead of having to wait for all of the builds, etc., to continually keep running, the feedback loop gets shortened significantly. And this is one of the, this is usually called the inner loop of the SDLC of the software development lifecycle. And like this is why like engineers are fundamentally impatient people, and you want things like right now all the time. And so that is one of the things because of fundamentally all of us just hate context switching. So that is one thing we are trying to optimize for. And this is, again, for a lot of open sourcey type of things, a model like this makes so much sense. But I'll show another little thing.
Just to add to it, initially as we are speaking about mentorship opportunities within the open source community, let's say you are working with a mentor, and many of the open source projects are backed by global contributors. And if you're trying to get feedback on your pull request from your mentor, then either you need to record a video and send it to them, because you have, let's say if you're not using cloud development environment, you had everything set up on your local machine and you want to ask feedback. Just based on the code changes, your mentor might not be able to see what actually happens with this change. even though he might be able to see the code changes and if it's correct or not. But let's say if you have these type of links available, you can share these links with them and they can review these changes, and you would be able to get feedback asynchronously as well. You can just share a link on the Slack, you can sleep whenever the person on the other side wakes up, he will be able to see, provide feedback, and you can close this and complete this pull request cycle, so you can get your contribution merged into the actual project faster.
Thank you. And with that, like, because I saw a few nods, especially when I was talking about the microservices aspect, I'll just expand on this screen a little bit. Most microservices, like this is obviously a slightly simplified version of if someone was using Kubernetes, this is what production would start to look like. Quite a few different applications running. Let's say you build to-do list apps. So you have 1, 2, 3 containers, different applications running, a couple of databases here and there. We try to also templatize these environments specifically for dev. I'll demonstrate this here. So when we type this dzcube new, underneath what's happening is, I'll pick this environment for now. I'm getting a combination of everything that's actually running in production right now. We'll make a copy for the developer. We'll then spin up appropriate databases, however they might be set up in production, a copy in for my local dev as well. And then outside of that, we create this thing called a dev pod. If our production software runs inside Kubernetes, why can't development also live there? Is the question we are fundamentally trying to answer. We have facts, random facts while people wait. It usually takes us 40-50 seconds to spin up one of these environments, but yeah, while you wait, you get facts. I am not really much of a Vim user, so I will connect this environment to my ID. dzcube. Awesome. So this is the environment that I just spun up. Over here, you will see again similar nature of things. None of the source code is on my local computer. Everything is inside this remote environment. On local, we have all gotten very used to doing things on localhost, but production is usually never on localhost. One of the things I'll demonstrate here is, I won't pull up the web IDE, but when I call this to-do list app over here, it calls the user service underneath. Like, we need to know who the user is in order to return the to-do items for a user. So this thing calls this, it talks to a database, returns stuff. This thing talks to a database, returns stuff. In production, this call would work, but now this call will also work in dev. So I do this. Great. So now I have a better symmetry towards or of production in my local. But as an engineer, when I want to make changes to something like a user service, what would that experience normally be like? I would clone the source code for this. I would clone the source code for this on my local. I would run both the applications. Then I would realize that I haven't set up the databases correctly. So I would set those up, apply the relevant database schemas, run everything, and then try to connect a debugger to this application. I will show you what this new world can be like. So the first thing I'm going to do is, I'm inside my dev pod right now, and that's why we can see the source code for these two applications. I'll do Python 3. Let's see, where's the source code for this user service? So Python user service. So again, because of all of the templatization, I didn't have to install anything like pip, etc., etc. Everything was already there for me, and I can just start to use things. And now, one thing I will do over here is dzcube intercept. Yeah, I must have a lot of confidence in this because I'm doing a live demo. that. Because everyone likes auth. Okay. So now the important part over here is this. It says intercepting like live traffic from somewhere. So now when I make this call again, you will notice that instead of like in production, this would have hit this user service and the call would have gotten taken here. What I just told with this DZ random thing is instead of going here, go make this happen. So when I make this call, I would expect to see something over here, like this process now getting hit, which is exactly what we say. So the net goal over here is pretty simple. We like to have our debuggers, etc., but how can we transport our debuggers into a production-like environment? So that's what we are trying to enable. Like instead of me having to push an image somewhere, or rather build an image, wait for it to build, get it deployed into a dev or a staging environment, how can I just have everything directly inside my ID on my local? So this is essentially what we have been doing. A few areas that if anyone over here is interested in helping out, we are constantly like that flow I showed you, trying to add templates for various open source projects. So if you want to get started on one or own one, feel free to just hit us up. We'll get these things added into DevZero so that other folks, it'll be easier for everyone else that comes after you.